Hi, I'm Daryl Forte, owner of Everlast Software. Today I wanted to speak a little bit about malware. So malware is any kind of software that's running on a device that has malicious intent. So that's basically what it is at a generic level. There's all kinds of different types. So that's why I wanted to talk about today. So the first type is called adware. And what this does is pop up ads on your computer or your mobile device trying to get you to buy something. So they're advertising some kind of product. Sometimes you try to close the dialogues and they just keep popping up infinitely. Very annoying stuff. The next type is called Scareware, and the purpose of this is to try to scare someone into buying something they would normally buy, whether it's software or a service. Sometimes you might be browsing in your web browser and all of a sudden it tells you, warning, your computer's infected. Let us install our PC repair software and we'll fix it for you. Of course, they're trying to scam you. Your computer is not infected, but they're just trying to make it look like it. Sometimes Scareware will have a phone number and they want you to call the phone number so that they could remotely control your computer. The next category, which in my mind is the most dangerous nowadays, is ransomware. And what it does is basically takes your data for ransom. It encrypts all the data on your hard drive, or a lot of your data, with a password that only they know about online. It gets uploaded to a server somewhere and you don't know this has happened. And it's doing this in the background, so you don't know your files are being encrypted. It could take hours or sometimes days before it finishes. It can even span across networked computers, especially in businesses. It's awful. It can hit file servers and start to encrypt everything there, so backups are critical to prevent it. That being said, ransomware is usually obtained by you downloading a program that you shouldn't download and running it. In fact, all this malware is typically injected in the same way. Another way is if you click a link in an email that you shouldn't have went to, and it tells you, oh, you need to update this plugin, and you update it, and sure enough, you're infected. So anyway, ransomware demands a payment from you in order to restore your files. There's no guarantee you're going to even get your files back if you pay the ransom. That's the bad part. The next category is called spyware. And this runs in the background. You don't even know what's happening. But it's just gathering information on you, whether it's trying to find credit card information, Social Security, and things like that, so it can steal your identity, or if it's something more like just email addresses from an address book, so that it wants to be able to start spamming people or spoofing email addresses. But the essential concept of it is that it's just spying on you and grabbing information that you don't want it to grab. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the word virus. Technically, a virus requires a human to spread it. So some type of human interaction, whether that's you having an infected flash drive that you plug in, or you running a program that's infected, it always requires a human to intervene to cause it to happen. Now, there's three main categories. There is a file virus, which executes via an executable file, like a script, a batch file, an exe. On Macs, it'd be a DMG file, for example. There's a macro virus, which executes only if a given program or particular version of software is installed on the host. So usually those happen because of an exploit with a vulnerability in the software. For example, you could open a PDF file, which isn't an executable file, but if you have a particular version of Adobe Reader and they've crafted this PDF to find a vulnerability in it, it could actually execute a program on your computer. So it would have the same effect as you actually running a program. So that's what a macro virus is. Usually it's something like Adobe Reader or Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. In fact, when you open Word anymore, the default is to say, scripts are disabled by default. Do you want to enable macros? And that's why, is because of viruses such as that. The last type is called a boot sector virus, which infects part of the hard drive that you can't normally see. It's not a file. It's just readable data by the operating system when the computer is starting up. So these are much harder to find, and they can do all kinds of crazy things to hide themselves since they run before, let's say, Windows or maybe even Mac OS X runs. So that's what a boot sector virus is. Moving on, and just to mention, the whole concept of a virus is it copies once it runs. So it has to copy itself to something else and infect something else in order for it to be considered a virus. Just like in real life in a human body, a virus spreads by your cells copying. Okay, the next category is called a logic bomb. And these typically execute when the timer expires that has been set for this malicious piece of software. And normally you would see something like this maybe in a business. For example, you could have an IT person that isn't a very nice person who installs one of these on a server. And what they do is they have it not go off if they tell it not to. So maybe they set that timer for once a month. So the guy would have to remember every month, I'm going to tell it, don't go off. Well, let's say the person gets fired. They're no longer there. That logic bomb is just waiting in the background for that refresh, and it never gets it. So once the month goes by, it goes off and it destroys or does whatever the person has decided for it to do. Now, since it's controllable by a timer, they could set it for a year in the future if they wanted to. So then someone could get fired, a year goes by, all of a sudden everything on the server is destroyed, and the IT people are scratching their heads like, well, what's going on? How'd this happen? And the crazy thing about that is, if they back up the server and it has the logic bomb in the backup, when they restore, it may reactivate again. And so a lot of these logic bombs would be homegrown, meaning they're not widespread. And so antivirus software would be useless. There's no way it would find it. The next category is called a Trojan Horse. And it's the same as the concept of the Trojan Horse, with the Troys, where there's this giant wooden horse that soldiers were in, pushed inside the gate, and then once the gate was closed, they all jumped out of the horse and attacked. It's the same thing, same concept. Trojan Horse embeds itself and acts like it's some real software when it's not. So it's just disguising itself. When it runs, then it does whatever the malicious person wants it to do, which is typically doing damage or stealing information. But it requires human intervention for this to happen. A Trojan horse doesn't spread, it doesn't copy itself. Now, I will say this, some malicious software will hit multiple categories. You can't say program X is only adware. It could be a Trojan horse that does adware. It could be a virus that does spyware and adware. So there's all kinds of combinations. Next category is a worm. Worms are basically a virus, but it can spread on its own, and it can spread across networks. So it does not require human intervention. So these can be by far the most damaging from just a mass scale perspective or financial perspective. If you have a worm that's shutting down a bunch of businesses or servers and it's spreading across the internet or just a local area network, it can cause massive amounts of outages. The next and last type I'm going to talk about is called a rootkit. The reason why it's called root is because in the Unix operating system, root is the core user. It's the most powerful administrator on the system. So when it's saying rootkit, it means essentially that this software is kind of running as an administrator, and it can almost always hide itself. Since it has elevated privileges, it can do things that other malware programs may not be able to do. There's all kinds of different ways that it can install itself and run, but the general concept is it's running as root or the system administrator. And one final thing I wanted to say about malware in general is Macintosh or Mac OS X can be infected with viruses and ransomware and all this malware, contrary to what a lot of people think. Now, it doesn't happen very often for many reasons. Two of the top reasons being it has a much less segment of the market. So, maybe only 10% of desktops have Mac OS X running on it compared to Windows having almost 90%. So hackers want to go after the biggest bang for their buck. So that's why Windows gets hit more. But also, Mac OS X is built on Unix, which has a very robust architecture and security system in place. So by default, Mac OS X is much more secure. It has a lot better architecture than Windows does for security. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it brought out some information about malware that you weren't aware of. Thank you for watching.